beings who are maturing. But because this is a spiritual discussion, one has to also examine this, the expression human nature from a spiritual standpoint. And from a spiritual standpoint, one comes to the realization that what is referred to as human is only a process of development, a process of development which has arisen from the inner core, a process of development from an unconscious state to a conscious. Therefore, human nature can be viewed as an inner development of those features, those qualities which makes the inner core human, the nature which makes the inner core human. From the walk in the light of truth, we now know that that inner core of man is referred to as the spirit. Man started as a spirit germ and as an unconscious spirit germ. And in trying to become conscious, it has to journey away from its origin as an unconscious spirit germ. In that process, it sinks lower, and in becoming conscious, it takes on the human form, hence the word human. But it sinks itself not into the higher realms, but on the lower realm, which is transient. So it sinks further down. This realm that it has sunk to in order to develop, that realm may be called the animistic or the world of nature. So it is understandable how these expressions came about, because as the human spirit journeys from its origin as an unconscious spirit gem, when it sinks down into the region below it, and in becoming conscious, it assumes the human form. And this region it has sunk to is governed by other beings, which are called normally the animistic beings or the natural beings, which is basically a world of nature. And what you then have is that it's being supported to press out those innate qualities that have been stamped into it, such that it becomes self-conscious in the process of experiencing. So human nature, that expression springs up because each person has an intuitive sensing of this particular process. I'll stop there for now.
Um, I think I would like first to talk a little more about human nature, because that's a concept which is, in Western societies at least, in Western education, it's completely disputed that there is such a thing at all like human nature. The question we have really to basically to ask is, in a rigorously materialistic framework, is there something like human nature possible? Can something like this exist? If you just look at our physical body, and there we must say it cannot exist. And quite rightly, people who base all their thinking on a materialistic outlook say, well, essentially we are just animals, highly developed animals, but there's nothing specific human which an animal could not achieve through some evolutionary path which are still open. Now, human nature, that means something to live according to one's nature. Then we live natural. So if we say, for example, for a bird it is natural to fly, and for a camel it is not natural to fly. So a bird which flies lives according to its nature. A camel which tries to fly doesn't live according to its nature. It comes into it's something completely ridiculous if you saw a camel trying to fly. So there obviously are things, many things, all the groups, all the limits, how we classify things, have something like their own nature. And now, is the human nature really something so special that it cannot be achieved, that is unachievable by an animal? And there, of course, in our society, in Western education, and in Western philosophy, and especially in politically correct philosophy, there's a clear no. So we have to really think, to think about the meaning of life, or to write a book about being and nothingness, a philosophical book. Could a nightingale write such a book? Does a nightingale reflect on the meaning of life? And or why have they never started writing, or why they have never pondered philosophical ideas? And there seems to be such a big separation looking at the human being, which distinguish it from animals, that one really is inclined to say, well, there must be something like human nature. But where does it arise from? Where does it come from? If we have just a brain, and an animal has has the same brain, practically the same brain. Some animals have even bigger brains than we do from a weight. It's just the proportions which are different. Why do they not develop means or do things like like, for example, we know that animals use tools or create very simple tools, but of course they are light years away from the tools we have created to travel, from developing trains, a tool to travel, or to develop a gun, a tool to hunt. So there's a huge gap. And from an evolutionary perspective, animals or living beings have existed for millions and tens and hundreds of millions of years. And it's Homo sapiens just came at the very end of those huge stretch of time in a few 100,000 of years, Homo Neanderthal and Homo sapiens. Suddenly something happened, and it's clearly visible. there was an explosion of knowledge, an explosion. The human being started walking upright in a very short time, and it's quite different. So is that something natural, to walk upright as a human being? Apes don't do it. They can climb around on trees. We all know that they can walk for very short distance on two legs, but they are not feeling at home with it. And this feeling at home with it, that is being natural to the human being, it comes natural to walk upright. What makes the human being walk upright? What makes the human being think about the meaning of life? And those questions. And that's the basic thing. And there I pass back the question. Brother Greg has really pointed in the direction, said there is a core in us, which he calls spirit, which is different in its qualities from the core which an animal has. And taking on that spiritual view and saying there must be something more than the physical body in order to be able to explain those huge differences, that huge difference between animals and human beings, which really allows us to say there is something like a human nature. And that comes when we say this core, which is the human, which the human being has, is spirit, and the animal has a different type of core, of a different substantiality. And that explains that animal development and animal behavior. For the human being, it would be very unnatural to behave like an animal. And and for an animal, it would be impossible to behave like a human being. And that's exactly, if you look at modern morality, I was recently in a discussion of some church people, some Catholic church people, which was frightening in a way, because that was about morals and sexuality. And the church person, the priest, said, well, let's look at goats. And goats have homosexual behavior. So homosexuality is something quite natural. So the first big wrong or fault in his thinking is that what is natural for an animal is by far not natural for a human being. So if we find homosexuality in animals, that does not mean that homosexuality is the natural thing for human beings. Also, the second thing he did not consider, with all respect, there are also many animals which are completely faithful and which marry once, like ducks, swans, or penguins, which even after years of separation always keep to their partner. So one can say, okay, why not take those? Then I can say also monogamy is natural, because it occurs in the realm of animals, even much more frequently than homosexual behavior. And then, of course, he looked at a domesticated animal, which is a goat, and domesticated animals do not behave naturally anymore. So there's the other big thing of, we have here two concepts, but I'm not going into that now here. But the thing is to explain human nature, and if we say something of this exists, we need to assume that there is something, some core, something which is expressed in its behavior, and that which that core wants, that would create a natural human behavior, and which is in contradiction with that core is unnatural. So I stop here, and just to make that point, a materialistic point of view, which is the views propagated in Western societies now, according to those views, there would be no such thing as human nature. It would simply not be possible. And then, of course, one has to try to explain all those things. How does social behavior come about? They all do that. And how does ethical behavior come about? And they try to do it and say, oh, it has some advantage for my project, for my genes and things like this. But to come to the crux, every person must come to clarity on this point. Is there something more than the purely material human being, than this machinery, which is our body? And only if we say, oh, there's a core in it, a spirit in it, which enlivens it, and that spirit is completely different from that of core of an animal, then we can say there is something like an animal nature, there's something like a human nature. So I finish here. I pass it back to you.
Thank you very much, Brother Rainer. Brother Gregory, listening to both you and to Brother Rainer, I want to just delve into something, although in a way you have sort of both answered it, but I just thought it might help for clarification. You have told us that that human being, the core is a spiritual core, and the animal is a different core, or not the same as a human. So let's try to understand, and maybe I'm going digressing here, but I think it might be good to just a little bit address this as well. So my question really to you, Brother Gregory, is when man came on this earth, was that he evolved from the animal or some being, other being, pre-existing being on the earth, or has he come from some other way, just dropped on the earth somehow, if that's possible? And if you answer, that's basically an argument of creation versus evolution. That's how some people see it, that let's say people. So maybe Brother Gregory, if you can explain what's this process or how we came on this earth.
Okay, thank you very much for this question, and I will try to do the best I can. And I'll try to speak slowly. First and foremost, in discussions like this, it is good to start with facts. Which facts do not change? Which facts remain the same? And once the facts are acknowledged, then one is able to build upon these facts to elucidate other scenarios. In any scenario, that means all scenarios, the first fact is that they are constituents of this scenario. One may also refer to it as there are elements of this scenario. If the expression element does not suffice, one might stretch it a bit and say there are substances in this scenario. So this scenario is not empty. I won't use the word substances because these are what constitutes a scenario. Secondly, well, that first example, the first description I mentioned, that's a fact, because every scenario must have constituents, or must have elements, or must have substances. No intellectual can deny this. Secondly, these substances, these constituents,
Hello, brother.
so,
sorry, we
hello?
lost. Yes, you're back now. We lost you for a few seconds.
Oh, sorry. I said these substances, these elements, or these constituents, they do come together, unite. When they unite, sometimes they form alliances. And the process of unity, of uniting and forming alliances, from a starting point is what is referred to as evolution. When they fall apart again, that is dissolution. So these are facts that we have a process they also come together for all sorts of things. That process may be referred to as laws, may be referred to as rules. So on the one hand, you have the substances or the substantiates. On the other hand, we have the laws that stands above these substances and ensures that these laws are refreshed and maintained. So we have a triad. The first being substantiality, the second being the laws which govern substantiality, and finally the power which ensures that all is preserved. From these three facts, one can find that every other thing can be deduced. These cannot be denied. That being the case, one may now come and start asking, what is the origin of man? One mentioned substantiality. One mentioned the elements. What you see in the outside is only a coming together of, or the union of substances from the smallest atom into forming into molecules, forming into giant molecules, and the sorts, and the further differentiations. These are the outer formation, the outer representation of processes, which are referred to as evolution. But above these processes is that spark, is the power, which power ensures these processes continue and they are maintained. That spark or that power which holds together, in the initial instance, one may refer to as spirit. Or what other name do we need to call it? The laws which help in the maintenance are the laws in a particular scenario, in the case of nature, are the laws of nature. So these are facts. This is not a philosophy, but these are facts for any discerning human spirit to examine very clearly. However, to have a better understanding, one may also refer all listeners to the work In the Light of Truth, where all is revealed. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Brother Gregory, for that. As Brother Gregory mentioned, the knowledge and the discussion that we're having today, or we refer to rather, in our program today and every show we have, is the spiritual knowledge called In the Light of Truth, the Grail Message by Abdul. And if you would like to get a copy of the Grail Message, we know you can get it from this website, which is www.grailmessage.com. I'll spell that, www.grail, Grail, message, message.com. And dear listeners, you're listening to the Tuesday night spiritual discussion program. The topic for tonight is human nature, and we'd love you to join us with any questions or comments. The number to contact us here in UK, it is 079 444 31366. You can call, text, or use WhatsApp. If you are outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 31366. Again, you can call, text, or use WhatsApp. Brother Rainer, what I would like to talk about, I mean, this is such a broad topic, really, and we've sort of touched upon the differences between human nature and animals, and then that we know that they are different. But I think let's focus more on the human nature now. And so let's start with something very basic. Is human nature by default good, or does it have some other tendency which may be negative, let's say?
I think I feel a little bit unhappy. Let's
Okay.
look back on
All right.
on the last question about evolution.
All right then.
And evolution, this is, of course, what we understand by it is the origin of species. Why do different species develop? And if we look at if we look at the past, at the history of human development over the tens of millions and tens of millions of years, not only human development, of all life here on Earth, we know it has developed from very primitive life forms like bacteria, yes, and even more primitive life forms, which were even not cells, which were even not fully functional cells, but they were alive. So life has been there all the time. And this life force, it has developed from this algae and this bacteria, and has diversified into different all types of different bacteria. And then there came the cold-blooded animals, and we can follow those steps. In archaeology, we can find the fossils of those animals. So this is really facts, gross material facts, which we can see. Everyone can go into a natural history museum and look at the fossils and see how they have developed. And then we see how it's developed. After some long time, there were the cold-blooded fish in the sea and other animals. They finally succeeded to change and adapt to crawl onto land and developed something like lungs. And there was a huge hundreds of millions of years time passed till something like a warm-blooded animal developed. And then again, we saw those things, and everyone has seen those things. That tree with all the how that tree from one stem developed and branched out into hundreds or thousands of different species. This development tree. The important thing is that this development, of course, went out without any gaps. We can really trace back every human, every shape, every animal has precursors which are extinct nowadays, and those precursors have other precursors which are more back, and we can see how one animal changed and morphed into another animal, and suddenly we have those apes or those animals of today. And it's a very regular development, and it's called evolution. At the end of the evolutionary tree, we say there are more highest developed animals, like the more highest development animal science regards as the human being, and less developed ones, let us say, like cats or bacteria. But bacteria live today, and worms live today, and tapeworms live today, and even one-celled animals live today. Algae live today, very primitive, just at the very start which date back billions and billions of years. And of course, that evolutionary theory is correct. We cannot refute it. Everyone who refutes it today is a nutcase, to say it bluntly. And but we have to understand that the driving force who drove that forward is, of course, what Darwin said is just one very simple principle, the survival of the fittest. So that little cell and then adaptation. So a little animal always try to survive. Without that trying to survive, which is already, we must understand that this will to survive is already a non-material thing. It's an attribute which you cannot explain materially anymore. It's a metaphysical principle in the things. Why do they want to survive? Where does it come from? The atoms do not try to survive. The electrons or atoms would have been quite happy staying forever. Why did they where does it suddenly come from? The big question is, does this come from the outside? Has something being sunk into a principle being sunk into that animal body and gave him that desire to survive? Or has that developed on its own? Has it just appeared, emerged? That's what science says. Many people, it's this emergence theory. And they say such qualities emerge. Now, I leave that up to the listener to decide, and with the Grail message, he can come to more clarity about it. But we see a very well-structured development in the physical world towards the human being. Now, this is evolutionary theory, and they say, okay, there was the will to survive, and the fittest people survive, and so the living creatures today should be, according to that theory, the fittest person who have beaten all other things, who are more adept who are more capable of surviving than the other things. Now, having said that, if you look at that tree, which you can see in any museum, and you can also look on Google and see how the animals developed. It's a very ordered development. First, it started with simple things, and it always went to the more complex life forms and to more complex life forms, from one-celled animals to many-celled animals, to where the different cells started on taking different functions, like we have in organs today, but that all started with, and we know that. So without a plan, how is such a thing possible? And the big thing is there some plan, a pre-existing plan, which guided that development, always from the simple to the more complex? And of course, if evolution would be just a chance process, it would just look like a plate of spaghetti, all going backwards and forwards in no direction at all, and would not lead anywhere. And there's no doubt about it. If you put into a computer the survival of the fittest principle and the will to survive, it goes haywire. It doesn't develop to the human beings or to very highly developed forms. It just goes in all directions, except you build in so many constraints, and even then it's very difficult. It's just not testable, at least not in a computer simulation, although some people say they have programmed that. But if you look in closer, there are so many constraints about it. And quite clearly, if there is no principle, if the mutations is always by chance mutations, and then there is a natural selection that the ones who is best adapt survives, then why should they develop a bacteria? Is it less less adapt to survive than a human being. Of course, the bacteria has probably even more chance to survive. Its survival value is much bigger. It seems completely ridiculous to develop such a vulnerable thing, which walks on two legs upright, compared to another possible construction. Why don't we have 6 arms and walk on all 4? That would be much safer. We wouldn't fall over when we are drunk and hit our heads. Of course, the science has all answers to that, but I think, in my opinion, science is today in a state where it desperately tries to patch all those things up as good as it can to say that theory is right. That theory is correct, but it's not the whole story. It's just a small part of the story. And we must try to understand what guided evolution. And there we have to go to the core again in everything. We have got the animistic cause which guided it, and which made sure that not something develops back. For example, we know, for a bird to fly, that needed millions of years of development beforehand to come to that point, to take off. So the bones of those dinosaurs, they became lighter and lighter, ran faster and faster, and developed feathers. But it all went for millions of years, always in one direction, towards that end game, towards that final goal, to be able to take off. So how can that being, which has that precursor of a bird, how could it know that it suddenly has to decrease the weight of the bones? That made it probably more vulnerable towards more heavier and more to other dinosaurs or reptiles. But there you can see that there must have been something like a plan and a direction of development. And those processes which gave direction to evolution, those we have to examine, and those you find explained in the Grail message. But definitely evolution is a correct theory and it's a correct description, and it is well documented, it's indisputable. We have, our physical body has developed from out of the animal kingdom. And those physical bodies of the animal kingdom all had precursors, more simple, more primitive. And so every theory, every spiritual knowledge must be able to incorporate evolution. And so I pass it back here.
Thank you, Brother Rainer, for that. You basically expanded our understanding that this is really a process, how man has come on the earth, and not just like random, well, let's say one principle is survival of the fittest, but that doesn't explain everything. Like you've said, science has some of the answer, but it's not the whole story, and it needs to be a much wider picture than that. So, and we've already pointed to that there is a spiritual side. As a human being, we are spiritual beings, and although we didn't come on this earth first, other beings they were there before us, but there has been an evolution of the body, which you have mentioned, which we now wear now on the earth. So it's
Sam, just a minute. I thought one should add a bit.
Yes.
Science talks about evolution, and but it doesn't see the complete picture. It starts from somewhere and talks about evolution, yet it doesn't explain what evolution is. So you have a scenario where he's talking about evolution, and some have become extinct. Those ones that became extinct are referred to part of the evolution. And another word which is not used is dissolution. For those that are no more, It's as if they have fallen apart. The process of integration has fallen apart, so there's dissolution. So what science is doing basically is only taking a very tiny part. It starts from bacteria, which one feels it's an absurdity. Brother Ryder mentioned there must have been a plan. Before we had the bacteria, it is self-evident that there were atoms, which atoms came together in units to form so-called molecules, which molecules came together to form giant molecules. If there were no plan, would this have been possible? All right, before these giant molecules formed whatever one cares to call them, and finally you have what is referred to as bacteria, there must have been a plan for things to move forward. Else, like Brian said, we would have moved backwards such that there was nothing. And we, as persons, sorry, the way we are now, would not exist. So science has only given a very tiny part of the picture. It starts from bacteria, and it didn't look behind what was there before the bacteria. It didn't even consider there is a plan, or there are processes, or there are laws. It only assumes, and it talks about chaos and random because it has not been rigorous enough to understand that what is referred to as being random, strictly speaking, is not random. For if they want to explain randomness, then they would have said one step forward, another step backwards, so that there is no evolution. That is not the case. So, using a similar logic, there must have been a plan, which plan cannot be denied. It's because this plan is being pushed away and people just accept whatever comes without any rigorous examination. That has been the cause of many a problem. Everything must be examined rigorously, internally and externally. Only then do you have the possibility of structures which stand the test. Else, there will be theories which will be swept away, along the line. Because as more as the facts become known and these facts are tested with what is happening, then those facts which have been put in place, which do not hold, are swept away. So the idea of evolution, of course, is a natural thing. And what is evolution other than the uniting of different species? What is a species?
Brother Gregory, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we just lost you for a few seconds.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
All right. Science must be able to define a species right down to the beginning, from the energy level that it became an electron, it became an atom, a molecule. When it is started from there, from the energy level before it became a particle, then there will be completeness from the beginning. And then a pattern, a plan can then be seen and followed. That is the sort of rigor that is expected of science. But as long as it doesn't give it, it doesn't stand any chance to talk about the inner core of man or about human nature, because science in the first instance doesn't understand or cannot comprehend what humanness is or what nature is. For what is observed are only the external effects of nature. And that is why it's very difficult to hold on to what science has presented. But one may only take it as patchwork, piecework, as seen from the outside. Thanks.
Thank you, Brother Gregory, for that. I just want to follow on from that, because we've been talking about science, how it's not really answering the question. So I want to put this question, maybe I should put it to Brother Gregory, this one. So what actually is the purpose for humanity on the earth, Brother Gregory? Because, we have developed science, and man has done that, and, makes lots of inventions and so on and like that. And we seem to be as Brother Reiner said, the most developed, species on the earth, as a creature. So, what is our purpose here?
Well, Brother Reiner mentioned something which I keep talking about, a plan. As has been seen in the so-called evolution, which is the coming together of all the maturing or the progress of different species in its maturing, in uniting with itself or others, with different radiation, depending on the conditions. This is a plan. What science has observed, that is only external. But being human is what one had mentioned initially, that the inner core, that which activates everything, which activates this plan. When I made mention of the three facts, the constituents, which is the element, the substantiality, and then the laws, and then that which activates, which is the power. It is that power or that spark. One may call that the spirit or the energy. There could be only two types: that which is conscious and that which is unconscious. That which is unconscious may have the possibility to develop through a process and become conscious. So the inner core, that which activates what you see externally, needs to develop from an unconscious state. An unconscious state where there is no responsibility, through a conscious state, that means is aware of its surrounding, and finally to a self-conscious state where responsibility comes in. One may then refer to as this process as a process from unconsciousness of the human spirit, or an unconscious spirit germ, to that of consciousness and then self-consciousness, where responsibility comes in. And that can only occur when that inner core is able to experience. That inner core itself needs to evolve through experiences, which experiences will now force those innate talents which are within it to be pressed out. In that, we now have an expression. Therefore, one may refer to this, the purpose of man on earth is to come here and experience, using the body, the physical body which it has, as a tool in order to gather experiences and pass to that core which activates the whole process. It needs these experiences in order to mature. such that it may now become self-conscious on the long run. When it has become self-conscious, it's also aware there are others who may also come much later to this earth in order to experience, and having been here first and has matured in accordance with the laws which govern these scenarios, is able to assist others to mature through advice and experiences. That is the basic purpose of man on earth.
Thank you, Brother Gregory, for that. I think it really sort of clears the picture that, you know, what is really our purpose here. So thank you for that. Brother Rainer, I want to sort of explore more on that purpose. And Brother Gregory did mention about sort of looking after, if I can use the word, next generation that is going to come. So as we are developing from becoming more conscious, let's say, and you know, we realize we have to look after the people around us and also the world that we live in, and that's like increasing our responsibility. So what I want to ask you there is, you know, I mean, looking at the world today, you know, there's a lot of, the human population is very high, and there's a lot of demand, you know, for food and whatever resources that we need, and we are using that up really fast, and unfortunately a lot of devastation is happening in the world from, you know, let's say, if I can, there's a documentary that I watched yesterday, so I'll share a little bit from that, and then maybe this will be like an example we can explore. So basically, the clothes that we wear, let's say, the clothes that we wear from cotton, cotton apparently, just to produce one garment, it takes thousands of liters of water. And in this documentary that I saw, they looked at two places. One was Kazakhstan and one was Indonesia. So in Kazakhstan, there's a very big sea whose name has escaped me. And let's say since the 1960s, they've been having cotton production there, which has been just growing and growing and growing. And this sea has been just disappearing, you know, just for that production. And of course, some of the consequences of that was that the fishing that used to happen in that sea just disappeared. Let's say the place is, you know, now the sea has become like a desert, and it's just like the wind just blows over it, rather than before when nature was having way sort of holding it back and so on. So all this, and I'm going to give one more other country because it sort of gives another side of example of it. So the other cotton production happens in let's say Indonesia, where they have lots of factories along the river, and they need that water for cotton production. And then as they do that, they have to dye the clothes and so on, and so that they have this toxic waste which pollutes this river, and people are washing in that river. They're using that river for other things who live along that river, and so millions of people's health is affected from that. So my point is really, we've talked about evolution, we talked about survival, and we talked about responsibility of human beings, that we're supposed to evolve in that as well. But it appears, you know, for our earthly survival, we don't seem to care or think about the consequences of, you know, what we are doing. Let's say, as I say, I'm using this example of cotton production, you know, which is used in our clothes. So how it's like, okay, my one question would be, is there too many human beings on the earth that it can't be sustained, that, you know, what we need on this earth to exist can't be sustained? Or is that we just don't seem to know, or do not know how to find a sustainable way to live, you know, or is it actually not possible to do that? So I hope I'm not made it too complicated.
I think we have to try to get the discussion back to human nature, which we seem to have lost. But those questions are, of course, closely related to that one. And to put it shortly, all what you said is human beings acted and wanted to do something probably relatively good. They tried to produce the necessary garments to dress themselves, and by doing this, they created um, huge problems of problems of an of such a dangerous nature, which threaten now the human race in itself. So we could almost say to all those people who think that survival of the fittest or survival is the big overarching game, overarching plan which drove evolution. There something seems to have gone wrong then, because definitely it seems the human being has lost the capacity to survive. It has used its intellect, and it created conditions which threaten the very species, which threaten the very human being. So evolution, by producing that brain, has gone wrong. It has created a situation where this brain, which according to science has developed because it because it guaranteed the best of the survival, has turned just to its contrary. It's really annihilating us and created problems which threaten to swallow up the human race and wipe it off the earth. So something has definitely gone wrong, and the human being seems to have more power. It seems to have also the power to bring about its own destruction. Now, all those people now scream around, and they're very political, and this is not a political program, and I'm not political, because we know politics, with political measures, you cannot solve the problems. It's just those political measures which created those problems. And people, of course, left, right, and center scream for political decisions to be made, and governments should do this and governments should do that. The problem is that we have to look at the small things. The small things have those gigantic consequences, those consequences which offer transforming power. And from the outside, you cannot do anything. And a political measure is always something from the outside. And we know you have to look at any attempt to achieve something from the outside by political measures. It's been all the time a disaster of horrendous extent. I mean, think just a little bit like trying to induce a democratic government in some state where a regime change or something like this, quite of recent history. It failed terribly, and that was a political measure, and so they do not work. So, but let's look at human nature. The human being, if we live according to human nature, that, of course, we have got this human nature, but we've got that free will to listen to that human nature tells us what we should do, or we can also act against it. And this is really the crux of the problem. The human being today does not listen to its core, to its spirit, which speaks through emotions, and he's in fact even cut off from his core. So he cannot live, he cannot act naturally anymore. To act naturally, it's out of reach, that core. He cannot reach it anymore. Many people are emotionally dead. They have no emotions anymore. They work just out of this calculating machine, the forebrain. And that's really the crux of the problem. How, if we do not act out of, if we cannot easily act according to our human nature, if we even do not know it, it's been buried, it's been forgotten, it's that it stirs in dark recesses, it comes up as a kind of general anxiety or desperation, but we do not know where the desperation comes from. It's quite irrational. And even people who are very well off and have nothing to fear are overcome by some alarming feelings or alarming emotions. But okay, so if we cannot do that, then we act in a way, in a non-human way. And what we act out today is we act under the rule of the intellect, under the rule of analytical thinking. And it's this analytical thinking which creates political measures, which wants to express itself politically because it's its realm. The intellect has also a nature. The nature of the intellect is it tries to solve problems through analytical, logical thinking. And there are problems which cannot be solved by logical, analytical thinking. And all the important questions which concern the destiny of humanity or the destiny of the human being are outside of the capabilities of this intellect. And to act out of the intellect is not a natural thing for the human being to do. And that refers back to one of your questions before: is the human nature always good? And in principle, yes, but we cannot reach anymore the carrier of that humanity, our human core that is buried. We are cut off from that. And I think we should direct the discussion to keep that in mind. What is that which cuts us off from our humanity? And I already mentioned the intellect. And then also those questions become what you just answered, those problems. Thinking about those problems, that doesn't bring anything because we think intellectually about it. To solve and to change those things, we have to find our human core again. We have to start knowing again who we are, what is the real self, and be able to listen to that self. And that's a big journey of discovery with lots of problems involved. I pass it back to you.
Thank you.
And
thank you for that, Brother Rainer. Dear listeners, you're listening to Bless Radio. It's the Tuesday night spiritual discussion program. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the spiritual knowledge in the light of truth, the Grail message by Abdrushin. And the topic for discussion tonight is human nature. You can join us with any questions or comments. The number to contact us here in UK, it is 079 444 31366. You can call, text or use WhatsApp. Or if you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 31366. And as I mentioned, the aim of the show is to introduce you to the Grail message. If you are interested in finding out about the Grail message or get a copy for yourself, you can go and go to this website, which is www.grailmessage.com. I'll spell that: www.grail, Grail, message, MESSAGE.com. Brother Gregory, Brother Ryan has highlighted really, we've been using our intellect rather than, and that has cut us off from our humanity even, and he's also said that all this analytical thinking and political ideas or ways of solving problems will not help actually, and so we really need to find out what is our core and return to that. So we've mentioned that our core is actually spiritual, and so we know one of our abilities is free will. We know that for sure. Um, and so what I want to ask, and really, is how do we actually connect to our humanity or to our spirituality, and yeah, so that we can actually, discover the way to live in harmony with nature. Let's put it this way, because if we're talking about human nature, how can we discover that we can actually be in harmony with nature?
Well, if I may repeat, how can we discover how to live in harmony with nature? Is that a question?
Yes, that's a question, yes.
First, to live in harmony with nature, one has to understand what nature is, what features nature affords us, and at what time nature makes these features available. At the same time, we also need to know what capabilities we have. One of them is that of the free will. But at the same time, it is good to understand the communication between the inner core and what we now see, the physical body, that communication which takes place. And it has been that because the communication between the inner core and the outer physical body, that communication has been severely restricted. That is what has caused many of the problems, and that has led to a quagmire. Therefore, it must be mentioned, even if it's in brief, that the inner core of man, the human spirit, communicates with the human intellect through the human intuition, or what one may refer to as the intuitive perception. It presents a picture. By picture, one may refer to, might think or consider an image or a model. It presents a picture without words. This comes from the back brain. From the back brain, it is then transmitted to the frontal brain, where other features are activated within the intellect, which is the seat that we refer to as the frontal brain. Then other activities like speaking or other, like actions or hearing are then implemented. One will repeat it, that the inner core of man transmits its emotion, its perceptions from the back brain to the frontal brain. The reverse is the case, that when impressions are gathered outside, they are transmitted back through the frontal brain to the back brain and then back to the spirit. The spirit makes use of these impressions and decisions are taken, which decisions have an overarching effect on many things about the future. If you have that particular process is seamless, then you will not have a scenario where you fall into such a quagmire in which the humanity is now. If that process is severely restricted, such as we have within the present situation, now you can understand the one-sidedness that has caused things like climate change and has caused suffering and has caused all sorts of things, because what you now have is more like an overdevelopment of the frontal brain, because that is what is used again and again, with very little impressions getting through from the back brain to the frontal brain, and very little impression passing from the frontal brain to the back brain. That has been the problem. So, should man wish to do that which is right, such that all its activities are balanced, there is the need to ensure that that channel is kept alive vigorously. With that, many a problem, many an illness, many a challenge will be resolved.
Thank you, Brother Gregory, for that. I want to explore it a bit more now with you now, Brother Rainer. You know, we have lots of, let's say, beliefs or spiritual teachings, and let's say most of the followers of such teachings are accepting them blindly and saying this is from God, and so it's, you know, you can't really question it. And then we have had on the other side, you could say, science, which you know, really wants to understand and you know, make sense of things, to use it to, you know, for things to, you know, we can use on Earth, for example. And then Brother Gregory has mentioned about, let's say, how the process of the spirit operates, you know, through the back brain with the intuition, and then being passed to the how can I say, working in with the front brain, which is for communication on the Earth. So what I want to ask you on that really is, how are we meant to really, you know, use this tool of, you know, being on the, we're on this Earth, and obviously we want to live in a sustainable manner and develop ourselves consciously and so on. The teaching that we've been given, are they like sort of knowledge that we are meant to just absorb it and then apply it directly, or are we meant to try and, you know, so rather almost like, I'm going to use the word blindly, accepting it because it's coming from, let's say, it's coming from God, it's been received and it's been passed on to us? Or are we meant to really, like we say earlier, that become conscious of it, what is it actually it is, and then, you know, practice it with some consciousness? So so can you please tell us a bit more on that? That's to Brother Rainer.
I think we have to be quite clear about that one point. We are not properly functioning human beings nowadays. We are kind of brain cripples. Now, the Brother Greg, he went a little bit into the details, how they're laid out in the message, but we work out of the forebrain. The forebrain is a machine-like cold thinking, and it has its natural place in developing technical solutions. And there humanity has had a wonderful development on the technical side. We have wonderful machines today, and that is the triumph of the forebrain, of analytical thinking to some extent. But what we have lost is our human capabilities, those capabilities which make us human. Although we have a wonderful technical development compared with the animals, for example, but this is more that as human beings, we could use our brain in a much better way. And it's the usage of the brain. But which made those huge progress possible, and which showed itself, or which manifested itself as this huge difference between what human beings do on a technical level and what animals, for example, do on a technical level. And there seems almost an unfathomable wide gap in the capabilities. But it is because we have something like the spirit who knows how to use the brain in a proper way. But also this brain has been developed one-sidedly, and this brain now rules. Now, all the problems which you just mentioned, we can always reduce them back. First of all, we must say, we must be very careful with such words, those saying those teachings came from God. They came most of the part from creatures, from beings, human beings, and to some, in some, and and those, we must see those teachers already had some limitations. And then all the teachers, like Lao Tse, and we do not, and all the teachers have given some knowledge to humanity, but humanity could not receive it because it starts receiving and analyzing only with the forebrain. So it never understood those teachings, which, with the exception of which practice, and those teachings were then distorted, and what has been written down was written down by human beings. What has been remembered was remembered by human beings. And then human beings started to think about it. Well, thinking already is forebrain activity. They start thinking and thinking and thinking about it. I'm not saying that there are not very good thoughts in theology, but there's also, in that nature of that forebrain, there's also the tendency to, there's the inability to grasp those concepts, where those concepts come from in these teachings. They are simply not understood because that forebrain cannot understand it. It is an instrument which is made here for life on Earth, to get around on Earth and help us find solutions where we need some technical expertise. And but those messages are of a completely different nature. They from the light. They concern things like God itself. Well, God itself, we cannot think without the concept of eternity. Well, eternity, something which has been there forever and will be forever, it's completely incomprehensible to the intellect. And that's such a basic principle which you always need. And so those messages have all been distorted and brought down, and the understanding and the theological writings of it, they are sometimes ridiculously in their limitations, and that's why it happens that that also things which are in the Bible, for example, are completely misunderstood because the wideness of the concept cannot be grasped by the intellect, and so he tries to push it on Earth, and then comes then we find such things like paradise. Paradise has been 4,000 years before Christ or something, and it's been here on Earth. Well, this is a ridiculous notion, and we have to get away from it. And the cause for those notions to understand what is paradise, and it's such a wonderful, great thing, which is far beyond the earthly and which needs much, which never can be grasped by the intellect. We have to look back to that spirit core, and that spirit core, that is which gives the human being the human nature, and gives it that capability to understand those teachings, and would also have given the capability to write them down, to portray them, to pass them on to the next generation in a more truthful form. Like nowadays we have them, they are completely distorted. And often they are outright evil. Most of the times they are even outright evil. Instead of leading people upwards towards the light, they lead them into confusion and lead them to do terrible acts, which no one can say they are in accordance with human nature. They are in fact inhuman acts which are permitted on grounds of those distorted theological concepts which we call nowadays religions. And it's quite understandable that people, to a large extent, turn away from religions in horror and say, look what is all being done in the name of religion, and even worse, in the name of God. We can say everything who says he does something in the name of God has no concept of God, not the smallest understanding. He would not dare to utter that name. And so we have this very dreadful state. Those things, those faith systems, those religious systems which should lead people upward, have just resulted in the complete contrary, have led to very inhuman acts, and only a human being who is not in touch anymore with his human core can do such acts. So we already there, it shows itself very clearly. These religious zealots and activists and fanatics, they are not in touch with their human core. They have lost completely that contact with that human core. Otherwise, they would not do such things. And if they would listen to it, they would shy back, because something would really tell them, no, I cannot do that. I cannot commit that act. And so again, we are not humans today. We cannot be called humans except from the body, but we are not behaving in a naturally human way. Unfortunately, through that free will, we have the possibility to decide against our human nature and to say, we want to become not human. We want to become wild killing machines. We want to become latter things who think the aim of life is just to eat and drink and have sex, yeah. And I'm not interested in more. And many people do that. Wealth and power, that's enough. And sex, what more do you want? Well, this is we call him a human, but he has nothing left of human nature. And what we have to come back is to find human nature and to find that human core in us, from which human nature arises. That's the origin. The spirit is the origin of human nature. That carries the knowledge what human nature, what is human, what is behavior worthy of a human being. And we have to find that, we have to discover that behavior again. And the Grail message helps you on that way. It does not go the way for you, and it does not tell you the thing what behavior is worthy of a human being, which we really can call human. And it does not tell you that, but it gives you very clearly the way which you have to go to discover it. And by going that way, we will develop forms of behavior which are more and more human and which are more and more in line with our human core, and can say they display the beauty of behavior of a truly human being, and that is very different from the behavior we see nowadays. So I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you very much, Brother Reiner, for that. Brother Gregory, yes, that's what Brother Reiner has painted is it's a good devastating picture of, you know, like really, it's like because we are brain crippled, because we have like completely distorted the the teachings, the spiritual teachings, and even sometimes they've not been passed on, accurately or properly, that we can really rely on them. So we are sort of left on our own, from what I can see, and we are left on our own, and then also we are not in touch with our real humanity. So what I want to ask you, Brother Gregory, is really, what's the way out of this? Is it like, I mean, because it's like you can't really rely on another human being for anything, because there's been so much distortion, so much corruption. The teachings that exist also corrupted. So is there a way we can work out from, what is, let's say, reliable, that will lead us out of this? I was going to use the word hell, actually, because I can't think of anything better. I mean, we've talked how much devastation there is. The world is going down. It really feels, we're committing suicide, basically, in the way we live. So what's the way? Can we come out of it? Is there we said we can't do anything politically, so there's no mass way of sorting out these things. So what is the way out? That's what I would like to ask you to Brother Gregory.
Sorry, if I may call the question, what is the way out of what?
Of this turmoil that we exist in on this earth, where there's things which are distorted, things are corrupted. How can we, what can we use, or rely on, or to find the answers, or just how to connect with our humanity, basically, and then find the way that we are meant to go?
First, in the first case, when you mentioned the way to go, is that whatever comes our way must be examined thoroughly and very rigorously. Within the human spirit, there lies in those features which, when developed to fruition, should take us from our current position to something which is higher. That only means that we should exercise, we should give a free rein to one's intuition. But this has to be done individually. Each personality must carry out this exercise. One should remember or should recall that whatever one does not use vigorously or rigorously very soon fades away. But whatever is practiced again and again stands. It means it can be called upon. It's the case of an artist. You need to always practice if you're a musician, else you cannot get to such heights as you wish to get to. In a similar manner, one should always strive to ensure that the impression coming from one's spirit, those impressions are interpreted correctly. At the beginning, of course, there will be challenges. This one also helps to clarify many of the challenges that one may have in future. What we eat also contributes to this. As long as that channel, those impressions from the spirit are able to filter through and are interpreted correctly, then we are one or two steps in the right direction. It was because that channel was severely impacted. That is why we are in this, quagmire. So to reverse it should be our first policy. But that does not suffice, for there have been works like the works of Christ, the simple examples that he gave of how man should live. Should such works be examined rigorously and correctly, then you have a scenario where the sort of warfare that you have here on earth will not even exist. But it was ignored and he was nailed. There is now another work which forms the reference or the basis of most of the discussions we now have in this forum. That work, In the Light of Truth, the Grail message, which requires that such a work must be examined thoroughly, very rigorously. Try to see the pictures that are formed by these works and compare it with everyday living, everyday impression and expressions, in such a way that one becomes personally convinced because one has examined it in all its rigor, inside out, in many ways. Such will remove the doubts. Such will disperse the dogma which we ourselves have accepted without questions. With that, each personality will have clarity in many a thing he or she does. And following that path, before long, many evils will be avoided, and the paths to spiritual perfection will therefore be opened. That is the only way to swing unconditionally within the rules or within the laws of nature, such that our human nature will grant us the possibility of self-consciousness, such that the journey that the human spirit set out as an unconscious spirit gem is able to complete that journey and become knowing and becomes self-conscious, such that the processes in nature will bear it back to its origin, where it may live in joy forever.
Thank you, Brother Gregory, for that. There's something I'd just like to read out from a listener. It's not really a question, so I think they have been this is their appreciation from the Grail message. So I'm just going to read out for everybody here. What actually is human nature? Is it what we see in daily life, or is it something more vital, more bright, more living than everything we presently even imagine? Surely it is more than all the worldly things of life put together, more than loving one's wife, children, family, job, more than something one can achieve in one lifetime. Yes, I'm personally sure it is more than all these things, for I personally believe the true human nature is of spirit, something that only in achieving consciousness and spiritual consciousness will lead us into the understanding of what is real human nature. what real human nature actually is. One could even say, not unlike any other talent, it is a talent of the developed spirit, such as integrity, perhaps. So thank you, listener, for your comments and point that you've made. I just want to ask Brother Rainer or Brother Greg, would you like to say anything on that?
Not really. I mean, what can one say? It's
Yes. Yes.
it's true. We've got that spirit inside us, and a swinging, alive spirit which tells us all the time what is right and what is wrong, and to do good to our brothers and sisters is the best way to ascend and to come in touch again with that hidden part of ourselves, with our spirit, and so that this alive spirit will make itself felt on the outside. And the real problem is now how to get in touch with it. And doing good is something, being good in all respects, every moment where you are, every moment, from moment to moment in the present, all the time, try to be good. If you deal with a plant, if you bake a bread, make it good, make it well. If you talk with your husband, or if you talk with your sister, or if you talk with a stranger you just meet for some moment, be kind to him, show him, treat him as a human being, and don't try all those things the intellect tries to do. Take advantage of him and manipulate him perhaps to your own, for your own purposes. This is all of evil. Just be good, try to help him in a true way, and helping might be just listening very carefully to another human being. And in that way we get in touch again with ourselves, because this spirit is ourselves. That brain machine which we have is not ourselves. It is something cold. It's an instrument we use. And as this listener just said, we will have to come in touch with ourselves. And we know that the spirit, it only speaks through emotions. They are called intuitions or intuitive perceptions, intuitions, but really the spirit is waves of emotions. It is as infinite as emotions are, with thousands of colorings, and to listen to those things is really, it's a beautiful thing. And try to be aware of the emotions which you are having, and don't mix them up with feelings like thirst or sexual desire or something like this. These emotions are of a much higher and a much more beautiful, much freer nature. And in fact, they are of a spiritual nature. You learn to know about what is spiritual. That's a wonderful discovery. But the way is very easy. That's the most important thing the Grail message says. The way is natural, because it is accordance with the way to do good and to solve all the problems is to live according to our human beings, to find ourselves again. And I think one cannot finish that session with a more beautiful word than say, let us become human again and live according to our human nature, and then all the problems will solve themselves. And this, of course, is in one way, it's the most difficult thing, because it's quite easy to change the world, because I do not have to change. The problem is, As soon as I have to do something, oh, one shies back. Oh, that's difficult. Oh, that's very disagreeable. I have to change. No, the whole world shall change, and the others and the politicians shall just enforce those rules so that the world goes as I think it should go. And that creates, of course, disasters. And everyone, today we have a humanity where so many people just think the government should run as they think. And laws should be passed so that their interests are furthered. But that's not the way. We have to look back. Don't try to change the world. Try to change yourself, become human again, find your human nature. And emotions are something beautiful. They make life worth living. And this is really a wonderful thing what you will get. You will find a life which is worth living if you find your human nature. And all the artistic realm, we have not talked about them, all the realm of beauty that is completely this is completely the realm of the human spirit. So if you strive in beauty, what you do, in the way you walk, in the way you talk, in the way you dress, you have a huge realm of activity which will bring you in touch with your own self again, which is that human core. And that is what it means to live natural in the way a human being should live natural, which is according to his or her human nature. Okay, I'll finish now. It's almost 9 o'clock. And
Thank you, Brother Ron. It's actually 9 o'clock in Germany, but it's 8 o'clock here in UK. So
oh, sorry, yeah.
That's all right. It's okay. So yes, thank you for that. So I'm going to ask, Brother Gregory, anything you'd like to say to the listeners to say good night?
Well, I will say they should have a good week, and I wish them everybody well.
Thank you. And Brother Ryan, any few words for the listeners?
Yeah. Think of your human nature and don't forget it.
Okay. Thank you. We're going to be back next week, listeners. Thank you for listening to us tonight with another topic. I haven't thought of the next week's topic yet, but it'll be an interesting one for sure. I'm sure you noticed we were off last week. I should have mentioned that. Yes, we couldn't hold the show, unfortunately. But yeah, we're going to be back again next week, as always. So please do join us. Brother Sayom's next. Do you want to say? I'll just say hello to him. Welcome, Brother Sayom, and please stay with us to listen to his show. All the best, everybody. Have a great week. God bless.